Great, hey everybody. We're going to get started back up. I'd like to remind you just to please keep your phones on silent. Right before the break, we had Peter Cash talk to us about the importance of taking risks, about tenacity, about viewing failure as positive. And our next speaker is going to talk about his own personal experiences with failure. So I'd like you to please give a very warm welcome to Mr. Henrik Fries on his talk about perseverance.
My name is Henrik, and today I'm going to talk about the perceived notion that we need to reinvent ourselves in order to follow the ever-changing society. My argument is this: don't follow the world, the path that the world expects from you. Instead, forge your own path. We live in a world that is constantly evolving. We see this technologically, politically, and culturally. This does not mean that you need to change your personality, who you are, and what you stand for. Instead, take advantage of your personality. Take advantage of your potential. Take advantage of your ideas. Every single person here has a character. And within every character follows certain traits that come with every single person. This is what I call the toolbox. Some people are more creative-minded, some are more analytical, and perhaps some are more artistic. Knowing what you're good at is just as important as knowing what you're not good at. Now, the number one thing that I believe we can find in our toolbox is the trait of perseverance. Without perseverance, all our other tools can become meaningless. Without perseverance, you cannot achieve your goals in times of hardship. Now, we all know what perseverance means, but the best definition that I can find out there is that perseverance is all about doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success. It's about trusting yourself and your capabilities that you can achieve your goals, no matter how difficult they may be or how long they may take. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 personal examples of how perseverance has helped me in 3 very different settings of my life. The first example is about love. The second example is about business. And the third and final example is about war. This is a picture of me when I was 10 years old. And it was at this age that I was in love with a girl called Delia. Now, my first interaction with Delia was one day at the school's playground. My teacher was telling me off for a reason that I can't remember. And as she was taking me back inside, I see this girl sticking her tongue at me. And I was baffled. Why on earth was this girl provoking me, challenging me? Who was this girl? But I realized that I liked her from the very beginning, and that there was some sort of connection there. So that night, I scrambled to find the yearbook at home to figure out who this person was. The next day, I asked a friend of mine to pass her a note saying that I had a crush on her. Luckily, I got a note back saying that she liked me too. So I was like, great, it's settled then. But you see, unfortunately, I hadn't exactly developed the courage to go and talk to Delia. So all of our communication took place via email. I remember that my heart would almost stop every time I saw her name on my inbox. And one day it almost did stop, because I got an email from Delia saying that she didn't like me anymore, that we should remain friends. And this was like 2 days later, so it's not like we had a super long relationship. But it really was the first time that I thought and felt that I was in love. So I was completely heartbroken. But I was also a 10-year-old boy. And how does a 10-year-old react to rejection? I didn't know. I hadn't exactly developed the toolbox that I was aware of yet. So I had to rely on my instincts. And my instinct told me to try to win her back over. So I started bombarding Delia with emails, dozens and dozens of emails, which in hindsight, I probably should not have done, because that didn't really work. Then I tried calling Delia's house telephone number. Now that did technically work. I spoke to her mother a couple of times, but Delia was strangely never home when I called, so that didn't work. I even tried talking to Delia face to face, one of the scariest things I ever did in my life. That didn't work either. Unfortunately, the door was closed. But the lesson here is not that I failed. The lesson is that I didn't give up before I explored other opportunities for winning her back over. By persisting, I eventually developed tools and attributes that would all form part of my toolbox. I enhanced my communication skills. I found courage. And I even found the tools that helped me overcome sadness and rejection. But the story with Delia does not finish right here. I'll get back to this part a little bit later. Moving through my journey, I arrive at example number 2, which is business. At around the same age as my first love story with Delia, I started my first business when I was 9 years old. I transformed my room, and more specifically my closet, into a kiosk, and I sold candy to my family. Now, this was not a groundbreaking financial success, as you may think it was, but I loved the concept of running a business, of buying products, and dealing with customer service, which of course consisted of my mom, my dad, and my big sister, who was my best customer. When I was 15 years old, I moved out of my parents' house to go to a boarding school, and it was here that I would develop lots of ideas that would materialize into different businesses. My first real business came shortly thereafter. I started a website where you could play online flash games. It was called Game Must, and it was a spectacular failure. I actually think the kiosk I had when I was 9 years old was more profitable. But I learned a lot about different programs, advanced software, and the value of having different people on your team. My next startup attempt was a dropshipping website. I would dropship PlayStation, Xbox, and PC games from the United Kingdom to the Danish market. And at some point, some of the games that we sold were the cheapest in Denmark. But our profit margins weren't really that great. So our whole concept wasn't sustainable, and I had to shut down this business as well. After high school, I decided to work at Domino's so I could save up enough money to go to New York to study human rights for 1 semester. You see, politics had recently become a new passion of mine, but I always had the interest and the intrigue for business. So once I arrived in New York, I quickly found out that my real estate agent, he had lots of apartments. So I made an agreement with him, and within a few weeks, I set up a website and started offering fully furnished apartments to Scandinavian students traveling to New York. Now, while this concept, I think, was pretty good, it never really took off. And after some sound advice that maybe I should prioritize my studies, I took that advice, briefly. And then I moved to London after that semester to continue my political studies. Coming to London and studying at Richmond University was one of the best decisions I ever made. I ran for student government, I worked with the university on a number of issues, and participated in political conferences in Malaysia, Dubai, and elsewhere. It was here that I really managed to grow as a person and acquire even more tools and attributes that would also form part of my toolbox. I could probably stand here today and talk for hours about all my failed startup attempts, because the list is long. I probably failed somewhere between 7 and 10 different times. But the lesson is not that I failed, and some of them failed miserably. The lesson is very simple. I didn't give up. I kept on going until I found success. By persisting, I developed tools within business that I didn't know I could develop, because I never studied business. All of a sudden I knew stuff about marketing, strategic planning, leadership skills, sales skills, and so forth. But it is my interest in politics that brings me to my third and final example, war. In 2015, the war against ISIS was reaching its boiling point. ISIS controlled virtually half of Syria. They controlled the second largest city in Iraq, Mosul, and things were not looking all too good around the world. So my great idea was to go to Iraq and document the war against ISIS. Now, I can't tell you that my mom was exactly thrilled about this, because she wasn't. But the thing is, I could not understand how the international community could stand silent to the atrocities and to the genocide that were being committed throughout the region. And this is what always brings me to the great quote of Edmund Burke, which is this: the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. So from 2015 to 2016, I made 3 trips to the front lines of Iraq, documenting, filming, and learning. On my second trip, I brought 4 friends from university to help produce a documentary that we were making. Now listen here. In a conflict zone, if you do not have contingency plans for right about everything, then you're about to get screwed at one point or the other. And that's exactly what happened to us. So we arrived at Erbil. Erbil is the northern part of Iraqi Kurdistan. We arrived at 3 a.m. in the morning, just 40 kilometers from the front lines of ISIS. And our security detail had just canceled on us for the entire trip. So after we managed to arrive safely to the hotel, man, there was a lot of frustration within the team. In fact, there was so much frustration that one of our team members took the flight back home to London the very next day. So what do you do in a situation like this? You're in quite a pickle. Literally all the planning that we had been preparing for the past 6 months had in the space of 24 hours just gone down the drain. The way I saw it is we had 2 options. Option number 1, fly back home. I didn't really like this option. Option number 2, open up your toolbox. So I opened up my toolbox. Firstly, I found the tool of perseverance. I told myself that no matter what, we were going to do something despite the difficulty or delay or the shitty situation that we found ourselves in. I think that's a more accurate definition. Great. What else do I have in my toolbox? I have determination. I have the will to succeed. And I have the faith that everything is going to be all right. Okay, some would perhaps say this is a little naive, but nonetheless, these are good ingredients for success. Besides my toolbox, I was fortunate to see what my friends and colleagues had in their toolbox too. They were equally optimistic and had other valuable attributes that strengthened us as a team. So, together, we started contacting a bunch of people, and within 1 day, we managed to mount a full security team, schedule meetings with organizations, get translators, and get the permissions we needed to be at the front lines. Now, without going into too much detail, this journey right here is the most powerful experience that I've ever had in my life. But if it was not for that perseverance in a very difficult and scary moment, this would not have been possible whatsoever. Every single person here has a different journey. For some, success can come easy and quickly. For others, it can take a very long time. But one thing that I know for absolute certain is that if I had not failed before, the many times that I have failed, then I would not be standing here in front of you today. Failure is what shapes us into the human beings that we are. It's what determines what our character is really made of. So don't be afraid to fail. Today, I run a film production company. I run more than 20 film festivals around the world. And just last month, we opened an office at the One World Trade Center in New York and another one in Jakarta. We're 7 people at our headquarters in Copenhagen and more than 50 employees, volunteers, and interns around the world. I never studied film. I never studied business either. But I managed to combine the two through experiences, through determination, through a little bit of luck, but most importantly, because of perseverance. Never underestimate the power of perseverance. Now, before I finish, I promised that I was going to let you guys know what happened to that girl, Delia, when I was 10 years old. Well, Delia is actually in the audience here today. I invited her to come, as she's my girlfriend. We've been going out for almost a year now. So I guess my perseverance from back then really did pay off. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henrik. That last part was heartwarming, truly. Okay, so I want to ask you guys, what does reinvention mean to you? Underneath your seats, you will find a pen and a red piece of paper. And I want you to share what reinvention means to you based on everything that you've heard today, your ability to persevere, your ability to recover, sustain success, and navigate through this world with authenticity. More on that is our next speaker, Linda Friedland.
I remember this moment so clearly. It was the moment that I thought, this is it. This is the end of my life. I was sitting under a beautiful oak tree, giant oak tree in a friend's garden, at a family celebration. There must have been about 60 people there. And I remember having my two youngest children with me, a 6-month-old baby in a pushchair and a then 2-year-old. And in this moment, everything went black. I couldn't see. It was broad daylight. To be absolutely accurate, almost everything went black. I could only see the very top of my visual fields. I could make out the foreheads of both my boys, and I could see the very top branches of this oak tree. I knew I was in trouble, and I tried to communicate this to the person sitting next to me. But I couldn't get the words out. I couldn't speak. I couldn't articulate. This was almost 20 years ago, and I remember this as clearly now as I did then. I was taken urgently to the academic hospital. I was rushed in for a CT scan of the brain. And what I remember 20 years later is that while I was lying in the scanner, the tunnel of the scanner, the image in my head was that of being buried. I was so sure this was the end. There were numerous things that I was thinking of in terms of the diagnosis. Thank goodness, there was no brain hemorrhage, there was no brain tumor, no clot, all the things I had suspected. As a medical doctor, it's very difficult not to anticipate the worst. And after weeks and weeks of hospital investigations and possible diagnoses, the diagnosis was called a RIND, a reversible ischemic neurological deficit, a term no longer used in medicine. It's now called a temporary stroke, 48 hours. Within about 48 hours, my visual and speech disturbances settled. But this was followed by at least 6 months of severe daily migraines, and at least a year of intense fatigue. Very strange experience for a high energy person. It took many, many years for me to regain my real strength and energy. I'd been a marathon runner, I had 5 small children, and a very busy medical practice. I certainly had been under huge stress and pressure, but didn't quite realize. A disconnect of sorts, a frightening, frightening experience. Undoubtedly, I'd experienced a type of shutdown. Call it burnout, if you will. The term burnout is not really a scientific or medical term. However, it does describe that experience of hitting the wall. I don't know if anyone here has ever, to a greater or a lesser degree, ever experienced something similar. The moment where you hit the wall, or you fall off the edge, and you know that something has to change. Let's begin a brief journey together. This blueprint. What is this extraordinary life we seek? And how do we reach it? We all want success. We want to achieve something in our lives. We desire to do good and contribute. As humans, we have an internal drive towards accomplishment. And we also want to be extraordinary. We also want to be exceptional. Is it real? Is it achievable? What do we see in our digital, electronic, tech age, we see beautiful, incredible, smart people doing extraordinary things. Yes? What I call the front end of our lives. All in perfect HD, just as on our screens, just as on our Macs, our laptops, our smartphones, in high definition clarity, we see this wonderful front end. Is it real? Is it achievable? It's not easy. We live in an extremely competitive world. We live in a fast-paced, rapidly changing world where we have to constantly adapt and keep up. And we have also become hardwired for incredible urgency and hurry. Everything, even the non-urgent, is performed at top speed. We have become addicted to success, but we have become as addicted to the pace of living as to the outcome. And then, for all of us, we have a parallel experience occurring in our lives, what I call the back end. What is going on behind the screen? We may be depleted. We may be disappointed with how life is unfolding. We experience setbacks, we experience life's hardships, we experience rejections. I've had many, many of those. And at times we struggle to keep up with the demands and the pace of our living. We're exhausted, possibly anxious, and even depressed. A 1 in 5 chance of all of us experiencing a depression at some stage in our life. And no one is immune. Lots of what I call back-end disruptions, disturbances, software errors. And yet, we continue to make sure we are doing everything to keep the front end burning bright, regardless of what's going on in the back end. And the more we attempt to focus on the front end, the more disconnected we become, the more exhausted we become, until for many, the inevitable occurs, as with my experience. Add to this that our culture measures success by our ability to project strength and confidence at all times. Front-end strength, front-end performance, front-end perfection, back-end errors, back-end disruptions, back-end exhaustion, ignore. And so a huge disconnect happens. And eventually, with enough pressure, may have happened to you, may yet happen to you, but with enough pressure, the database is overloaded, and there's a crash. Let's move on to another front-end, back-end scenario going on in our lives, right here in our brains. We have this incredible structure right at the front of our brains called the prefrontal cortex. It's the most advanced evolutionary part of the human. Our analytical, thinking, smart brain. And then towards the back, buried in the structures towards the back, we have a group of structures called the limbic system. I want you to hold that concept for a few moments and we'll come back shortly. Because I want to share with you 2 conventional wisdoms that we live with, that we see as truths. And the first one is that stress is harmful and damaging to your body and brain. And the second one is, in order to achieve greatness, be resilient. You've all heard that. So let's deal very briefly with the first one. What is stress? It is feeling overloaded, feeling overwhelmed. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional. If we scientifically and clearly define it, stress is simply the release of a chemical, adrenaline, in your body. No more, no less. We have an incredible autonomic nervous system. It's automatic. It moves between 2 phases. The first being the stress response, facilitated by adrenaline. When a danger occurs, or a perceived danger, not a real danger, same thing happens, adrenaline is released in the body. Blood shunts into the muscles, heart beats much faster, heart rate goes up, breathing becomes shallow, brain is on hyper alert, all enabling us to escape danger, or enabling us to perform at our peak. The problem with being at our peak is it's very easy to fall off. And then the opposite phase of this nervous system, the relaxation response, is when the opposite happens. Blood pressure goes down, heart rate goes down, blood shunts back to the central organs, and bodies and muscles relax. This is when healing takes place. This is when we achieve some equilibrium. And this should kick in automatically. Adrenaline switches off, right? Wrong. We have overridden the off switch. We have chronically adapted to remaining in the on position. Beep, 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 continuously. We override the system, consciously and unconsciously. We release cortisol, another hormone, and we remain stuck in the stress response. And yes, it can be harmful and damaging. But no, it doesn't have to be like this. Here's the twist. Most stress is mostly good for you. Doesn't sound like a good word? Well, let me give you some synonyms. Stress is drive. Stress is passion. Stress is determination. Stress is motivation. It is stress that facilitates your performance and your success. Stress is not the enemy. So, we need to engage the positive stress in the same way as we engage a muscle. When you go off to the gym and you lift a weight, or lift your body weight in Pilates or yoga, or whatever you choose to do, you are stressing that muscle to create growth. And what do afterwards? You come home and you recover. But we don't do that in our lives. So the real enemy is lack of recovery, not stress. Here's a question. What do you do when your computer screen freezes? Or the database crashes, overloaded crashes? You stop, you get very frustrated because you want to keep going, and you reboot. Our brain and our bodies requires exactly the same. Stop, shut down, reset, recover, reboot. But there is no quick fix. No pill, no medication, no supplement, no zinc, no magnesium will do it. But the conscious decision to create packets of recovery, little packets, little pockets of recovery into your day, into your week, into your life. What do I do to reboot? If in the midst of a chaotic day, I'll do 15 to 20 minutes of meditation. If there's no time, I'll do 5 minutes of mindfulness. If there's no time, I'll do 1 minute of breathing. But I've got to stop and reboot. Before work, I've got to go swim some laps. After work, I've got to take an ocean swim or run. Play in the park with a grandchild. You find your reboot methodology. Moving on to the second so-called truth, conventional wisdom, be resilient. You can no more be resilient than you can be muscular. I'll never be muscular. Or be wise. Resilience is a transformation that occurs after the fact. Resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back from failure or setback. I don't know about you, I don't bounce. I crawl back from rejections and failure. But resilience is that ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back stronger than ever. So no, you cannot be resilient. But yes, you can become resilient. You can literally shift the set point in your neural pathways by the choices you make. By engaging the back end. How, you may ask? By being authentic, by being you, real you, by being courageous, taking risks, by being emotionally honest, by merging what the world sees with a healthy back end. the more you act in that way, the more it becomes hardwired into your brain circuitry, which brings me right back into the brain where I promised I would return. Front end, back end, numerous neural pathways between the two. Let us observe a few common negative emotions together that we all feel every day. Fear, frustration, anger, fury. A message is sent at lightning speed from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex. But what does our rational thinking, analytical super brain do? Here, it says go away, leave me alone, override, disconnect, disregard. Here again, we have an identical disconnect with the front end rational self that we have, ignoring the emotional cues, which are the keys, not only to insight and emotional intelligence, but are the keys to real, authentic success. Now I'm going to tell you a piece of science that I hope will get you jumping off the edge of your chairs. I haven't seen you do it yet. Because a lot of this doesn't sound like science. But through numerous brain scans using PET scanning, scientists have been able to show that resilience is not born here in the thinking brain. It develops and is born in the neurons of the limbic system towards the back of your brain. So, the blueprint to move from overwhelmed, exhausted, depleted, frustrated, to meaningful, passionate, healthy stress, drive. The blueprint to move from ordinary to extraordinary requires us to do three things. Recover intermittently. Create those pockets of recovery. Rewire your brain when you have it within your power. Reconnect front end and back end. Live your authentic truth. The more we engage with the back end, the more there is brain growth. Professor Carol Dweck, who you may have read some of her work, who has, from Stanford University, has done extensive research into this area of neuroscience, explains that there is a fundamental difference in the minds of successful people. She calls this a growth mindset. So the next time you feel like you are about to hit the wall, or fall over the edge, or depleted, or anxious, remember my story. Don't get to breakpoint. Stop, reset, recover, find your ways to reboot, and reach out and connect. The greatest thing about technology and the world we live in is the potential for great connection. And yet, we all live with lots of senses of disconnectedness. How much more powerful would our world be? How much more effective would you and I be if we truly understood the power, the genuine power of connection within our brains, within our bodies, with each other, and with the world? A congruence of front end and back end will transform your lives to truly extraordinary.
Thank you very much for that, Linda. Today, you have heard some of our speakers talk about some of the more frightening pitfalls of technological advancement. But you have also heard them talk about resilience, perseverance, tenacity, the ability for profound connection. Technology is fundamentally changing the way that we live. How do we adapt to an ever-changing world? What have we created to adapt to change? And how have our creations changed us? Technology doesn't have to be the thing that compromises our humanity or our ability for human connection. Not if we don't let it. Next, I would like to thank all of you for coming here today I would like to thank everyone viewing the live stream. I would like to thank our hosts, the University of Notre Dame in England, for this lovely space. I would like to thank Bridget Keating for making this all happen. I would like to thank our volunteer team for helping us with everything from registration to setting up the space. I would like to thank Maz and his production team for coming all the way from Istanbul and helping today's message make a lasting impact. I would like to thank all of our esteemed speakers for coming from different parts of the UK, the United States, Australia, and Denmark. And I would like to thank our organizing team. And our organizing team, if you wouldn't mind joining me on stage right now, please. I would like to thank Gonzalo, our head organizer, Fadila, our TEDxRAIUL curator, for helping our speakers resonate their messages in the most impactful way possible, to Oriana for publicizing the event and making it widespread for everyone to be able to see today, to Dan for helping out with all of the logistics, to Kieran for helping facilitate all of this, and most of all, to Allison for her faith in our work, for your support, for propping us all up, and for being the most wonderful. And that's it. Thank you everyone today so much for coming. Thank you so much.
Aksın, aksın. Çıkma.